You might hear photographers tell you that gear doesn't matter, but I'm actually here to tell you that gear does matter, but maybe not in the way that you think it does. Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. If you're new to the channel, my name is Chris Harvey. I'm a photographer based in North Wales, and today I want to explore this very contentious topic around gear and whether or not gear is important in the pursuit of photography. But more importantly, I want to actually answer a couple of very important questions for anybody who might be considering upgrading their gear. What are the things that you need to consider, and what are the most important considerations that you should be keeping in mind before you make that important decision of spending your hard-earned money on photography gear? So let's get into it. So if you've watched this channel for a while, you'll know that I don't really do a lot of videos about gear because for me, I'm not particularly interested in gear, but I am very interested in the process of photography, and I care an awful lot about the image making process or the video making process. And inevitably, the camera and the gear that you use is an integral part of that process. So I'm not going to stand here or sit here and say the gear isn't important, because it definitely is. And I guess I come from a unique background here of also being a professional photographer, being a photographer who does video work here on YouTube, and being somebody who has owned many different cameras over the years. We've got the Lumix S5 II, which I'm shooting this on. My first mirrorless camera was the first generation Sony A7, and I also dabble in film. You know, I've got the Minolta X700, which is a 35mm SLR, and last but not least, I have an incredibly temperamental but very cool Olympus 35mm point and shoot, which I bought for like £40 off Facebook Marketplace. It's a whole myriad of different cameras from all sorts of different eras that all have a very special place in my heart for very, very different reasons. So people might ask, well, why do you have so many cameras? Now, it's a very valid question, and I think if we look at creative hobbies in general, there is an aspect of gear that goes into the pursuit of those hobbies because it's an integral part of carrying out that hobby. And as you become more proficient and more skilled in that hobby, quite often your use case or your needs for that gear will change. Let's take my first love, my first hobby as an example, and that is the guitar. Now, music has always been a huge part of my life, and if any of you guys in the comments are, guitar players, then you'll know that you can spend a lot of money on guitars and you can build a pretty large collection of instruments, and everybody will always say, well, don't they all sound the same? Well, no, they don't. Every single guitar is different. The pickups will change the sound, the body shape will change the sound, and every guitar is unique in that respect, and certain guitars are more suited to certain genres of music, and as you become more skilled on the guitar, you'll notice things that you need to make your life playing guitar slightly easier. And I think the same can be said for cameras. Now, every single camera that I own is capable, for the most part, of taking a photo, with the exception of that Olympus 35mm point and shoot, which, like I said, is temperamental. But every single camera that I own can take a photo, but not every single camera is good at every single job. For example, I absolutely love my Minolta X700, that 35mm SLR, because I absolutely love the look of 35mm film. But I wouldn't be taking this camera on a hike up a mountain in the rain because it's a bit old and it's a bit, I guess, rough around the edges at this point. I'd be much more likely to take the S5 II because it's newer and it's weather sealed, and I just know that I can trust it in all elements. And I guess in the grand scheme of things, I haven't bought that many cameras or swapped out my gear that much in the past. I went from that Sony A7, that very first generation of Sony mirrorless camera, I guess it was, in terms of full frame. And I had that camera for a number of years, and I absolutely loved the photos that came out of that camera. At that time, that camera did the job that I needed it to do. But as I got into doing professional photography, when I sort of took the plunge into becoming a freelancer, I started to do a little bit more video, and I needed a camera that could sort of do that, and the Sony a7 couldn't really keep up. It was just not really cut out for the spec of video that was required at that time. So I took the leap to upgrade to the Sony a7 III. And I had that camera for nearly 4 years up until last summer when I upgraded to the S5 II. Now the Sony a7 III was an absolutely great camera. Again, cannot fault the images that came out of that camera. I can look at photos taken on the S5 II, the a7 III, and the a7 and look at those images side by side, and I wouldn't really be able to tell which was taken on which camera. But that Sony a7 III did give me more features than the a7 in terms of the video spec. But then, as my business grew, as my client base grew, and as my needs grew because I started this YouTube channel and I just started to do a hell of a lot more video work than I've ever done before, then I decided to switch from the a7 III to the Lumix S5 II, because the a7 III shot in 8-bit colour and this shoots in 10-bit colour, and it has a load more video features that the Sony a7 III doesn't. So again, I needed to make a change, but every time I've made that change, there's always been a reason to make that change. And this brings me on to reason 1 for changing or upgrading or determining whether the camera that you currently own is the right camera for you. And that is, does the camera do the job that you need it to do? Now that's a very subjective statement, but I make it very objective by only concerning myself with whether that's going to do the job for my own work. You know, I don't really watch a lot of gear reviews here on YouTube because quite often they are just too generalized and there's just a load of information there that isn't relevant to what I do. And for me, it's very much a problem-solving exercise. Is there a certain type of content, a certain type of medium that I shoot that the current camera that I own is prohibiting me from shooting in the way that I want to? And that is always question number 1. And every time I've upgraded my camera, it's because the answer to that question has been no in some capacity. It's never been about trying to keep up with the latest and greatest camera. Quite often it's overkill and it's unnecessary. You know, this S5 II is a fairly modern camera, but there are other cameras out there that are better than it. You know, the S5 IIX, for example, is more video-centric than the S5 II, but I didn't buy it because I didn't need those additional features. And whilst it's only a few £100 different, I'd rather have a few £100 to spend on a photography trip or to spend on something that is going to better my experience in photography. And that's an important thing that you need to weigh up. The second consideration, and I think the most important consideration that isn't talked about or isn't given enough weight to, is whether or not you actually just like using your camera. It's not anything to do with image quality, it's nothing to do with features, although it can be. It's more about the ergonomics and just the actual physical act of using the camera. And I can safely say that I love the S5 II. Ergonomically, it just makes me want to get out and shoot because I love the menus, I love the grip, I love how it feels, I love everything this camera provides me. And I can't say that about the Sony a7 III, for example, because I hated the menus. I set up custom buttons, but I still found myself tripping over the menus and spending far too long trying to find the settings that I wanted to change. I didn't like the grip on the Sony a7 III, I felt it was too small. And these are all just things that are little barriers to the actual physical act of using the camera and taking the camera out to do photography. You know, if you're not in love with your camera in terms of what it's giving you, you are going to be less likely to actually go and take photos, and that is going to be detrimental to your photography in the long run. You know, this is why a lot of people still shoot 35mm film. You know, is it the most technically proficient camera? Is it going to give you the highest resolution and the best quality images? Well, probably not on paper, but people who love the look of film and love the actual tactile feeling of being able to control, you know, all of these very I guess, like mechanical impulses from like the aperture ring and being very connected to the image making process. That's why people continue to shoot film, because it gets them out with their cameras because they just love the process of shooting them. And me now going down this route of doing more personal work, doing my Borderlands photography project, which I mentioned in last week's video, this idea of just being able to enjoy the process of using your camera is so important to me, and I think it needs to be talked about even more, because I do think that it's valid. If I owned a guitar that had the wrong pickups, or had, the wrong string height, or had, a poor setup, I would not be wanting to pick up that guitar to play it. It would just be an unpleasant experience. And I think the same can be said for photography. And whilst we can work hard to try and salvage, these cameras and make them work, sometimes it's just not worth it if there is something better that's going to help you do the job better. So I hope you found this video helpful. It's something that I've been thinking about over the last few months. It was definitely something that was an important consideration and thing to think about when I was upgrading to the Lumix. So hopefully it's helpful for some people out there to hear. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, do make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, do consider hitting the subscribe button so you can come along next week for another video. Right, I will leave it there. Thanks, guys. See you soon.